share, subscribe.
There's something about the night shift in hospital jobs that changes you. Something about walking those sterile corridors when the world outside sleeps, when the only sounds are the distant hum of machines and the soft whisper of your own footsteps. On linoleum floors today, I am going to tell you stories of a lady who have been nurse for 12 years now. And I'm here to tell you something that's been eating at me, something I can't shake no matter how many days pass. You see, hospitals aren't just places where people come to heal. They're places where things happen. Dark things, things that don't make it into medical charts or incident reports tonight. I'm going to share 3 stories with you. 3 experiences that happened with people during those long, haunting night shifts in hospitals. These aren't gifts. I'm giving you their confessions, warnings. Maybe, because once you hear them, you'll understand why some of us can't sleep when we get home, why we check our locks, twice why we avoid certain rooms, certain floors, certain objects that seem innocent enough in daylight, but become something else entirely when darkness falls. What would you do if you discovered something in a patient's room that shouldn't exist? What happens when the tools meant to heal become instruments of terror? What would you do if you realized that some patients never really leave? Let me tell you about Sarah, about Marcus, about myself. Let me tell you what we found during those endless nights. When death walks the halls and the living are never quite sure which side of the veil they're standing on. But before we begin, I need to ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? What time is it in your part of the world? And more importantly, have you ever felt that scary feel when you're alone in a hospital room? That sense that something is watching you from the shadows. If you have a story like ours, share it in the comments, because your experience might just become part of our next collection right here on Whisper and Wonders. We believe that the most terrifying stories are the ones that could happen to any of us. So hit that like button if you're ready to face the darkness with us. Subscribe to help us reach 10,000 souls who aren't afraid to listen. And comment below, because your story matters, your fear is real, and we want to hear it now. Let me tell you about the first night. Everything changed. This is my story. My name doesn't matter anymore, but what happened to me in the isolation ward, those who've been a nurse for 15 years. 15 years of seeing people at their worst, their most vulnerable, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I encountered in the isolation ward 3 weeks ago. It started with a code gray security alert. Someone had broken into the hospital through the old service entrance, the one that leads directly to the basement morgue. They'd managed to get all the way to the 7th floor before the cameras picked them up. I was working the night shift in the ICU when the call came through. All available staff to help with the search. The intruder was believed to be mentally unstable, possibly dangerous. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the isolation ward. The isolation ward is where we keep the patients who can't be with others, infectious diseases, violent psychotic episodes, end-stage delirium. It's always been the most unsettling part of the hospital, even during the day. There's something about those rooms that makes your skin crawl. The way the fluorescent lights flicker, the way sounds seem muffled, the way patients stare at the walls like they're seeing something the rest of us can't. I was checking room 12 when I found him. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing a hospital gown that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. His hair was long and matted, his fingernails grown out and yellowed, but it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They were completely lucid, sharp and intelligent in a way that didn't match his disheveled appearance. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "I need you to come with me. Security is looking for you." He smiled then, and I saw that several of his teeth were missing. "Security," he said, his voice raspy, like he hadn't used it in a long time. "They're not looking for me. They're looking for someone else, someone who doesn't exist anymore." I reached for my radio. But he held up a hand. Please, just listen. I need to tell someone what happened, what they did to me, what they're still doing. I should have called for backup, should have gotten him restrained and sedated. Instead, I found myself stepping into the room. There was something about his voice, something desperate and honest, that made me believe he wasn't dangerous. What's your name? I asked. I don't remember, he said, and I could hear the pain in his voice. I don't remember my name, or where I came from, or how long I've been here, but I remember what they did. I remember every single procedure. He rolled up his sleeves, and I gasped. His arms were covered in scars, not self-inflicted cuts, but surgical scars, precise, methodical incisions that had healed badly. Some of them looked fresh. They said I was a volunteer. He continued, said I had agreed to participate in experimental treatments, but I don't remember agreeing to anything. All I remember is waking up here, in this room, and them telling me I was sick, that I needed their help to get better. I moved closer, my medical training kicking in. The scars were unlike anything I'd ever seen. They formed patterns, almost like a map, across his skin, and some of them were still weeping, despite appearing to be months old. What kind of treatments? I asked. Take pieces, he whispered. Little pieces at first. A bit of skin here, a small muscle sample there. They said it was to test my healing factor, to see how quickly I could recover. But then they started taking bigger pieces. Organs. I stared at him. That's impossible. You can't survive having organs removed. That's what I thought too, he said. But they don't take them permanently. Study them, run tests, and then they put them back. They have ways of keeping me alive during the process. Ways that shouldn't exist. He lifted his gown, and I saw his torso. It was a roadmap of surgical scars, some fresh, some old. But what made my blood run cold was the fact that I could see his ribs, not through his skin, but through gaps in his chest, spaces where flesh should have been, but wasn't there. Mapping me, he said. Every organ, every muscle, every nerve. They remove pieces, study them, and then replace them with something else. Something that works better. Something that lasts longer. I backed toward the door. I need to get help. I need to call someone. Who are you going to call? He asked. The doctors, the administration, there. The ones doing this. They're the ones who signed the orders. That's impossible. There are ethics committees, oversight boards. No one could authorize experiments like this. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Look at the charts. Look at the patient records for room 12. See how long I've been here. See what my diagnosis is. I grabbed the chart from the holder by the door. Patient admitted 18 months ago. Diagnosis: chronic organ failure, multiple systems treatment, experimental regenerative therapy, 18 months. But that was impossible. I'd been working this floor for 3 years, and I'd never seen this patient before. Room 12 had been empty for as long as I could remember. You're confused, I said. You're not thinking clearly. Let me help you. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. He said, the last procedure was different. They took my brain, removed it, studied it, and put it back. But something went wrong. I remember everything now, every procedure, every test, every moment of pain they put me through. I looked at the chart. Again, the dates didn't make sense, according to the records. Procedures had been performed every week for the past 18 months. But there were no signatures from doctors I recognized, no approval from the ethics committee, no consent forms. Who's doing this to you? I asked. Dr. Crane, he said. Dr. Harrison. Dr. Mitchell. They work the night shift. They come in when the regular staff goes home. They have their own equipment, their own operating room in the basement. Past the morgue, I felt my knees go weak. Dr. Crane had been my mentor when I first started working here. He trained me, helped me become the nurse. The idea that he could be involved in something like this was unthinkable. I need proof. I said, I need evidence. The patient reached under his pillow and pulled out a small object. It was a recording device. The kind journalists use. I've been documenting everything, he said. Every procedure, every conversation. They don't know. I'm awake during the surgeries. They think their anesthesia works on me. But my body has adapted. I can hear everything they say. He pressed play. And I heard voices. I recognized Dr. Crane's voice, discussing the removal of a liver. Dr. Harrison, talking about the regenerative properties of certain organs. Dr. Mitchell, wondering how long the patient could survive with only half a heart. We need to get you out of here. I said, we need to get this to the authorities. You can't. He said, they'll know. They monitor everything, every conversation, every phone call. They have people everywhere. How do you think they've been able to do this for so long? I looked around the room for the first time. I noticed the cameras small, almost invisible, but they were there, in the corners, behind the equipment, watching everything. And what do we do? I asked. You have to stop them. He said, you have to find a way to expose them, but you have to be careful. They don't just experiment on patients. They experiment on staff too, anyone who gets too close to the truth. He rolled up his other sleeve, and I saw something that made my heart stop. Injection marks, dozens of them, all fresh. They've been giving me something, he said, something to make me compliant, to make me forget. But it's not working anymore. My body is fighting it. I'm becoming immune to their drugs. I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy boots. Multiple people. Security was coming. Hide the recorder. I whispered, don't let them find it. The patient slipped the device back under his pillow just as the door burst open. 3 security guards entered, followed by Dr. Crane. There you are, Dr. Crane said, his voice calm and professional. We've been looking everywhere for you. How did you get out of your room? I never left, the patient said, but his voice was different now, confused, uncertain. I've been here the whole time. Dr. Crane looked at me. Thank you for finding him. He's been having episodes lately, delusions, paranoia. We've been adjusting his medication. He seemed lucid, I said. He was telling me about hallucinations. Dr. Crane interrupted. Part of his condition. He believes he's being experimented on. It's quite common in patients with this type of brain damage. I watched as the security guards helped the patient back into bed. He looked at me with pleading eyes, but he didn't say anything. Couldn't say anything. Whatever they'd given him was taking effect. I'll take it from here, Dr. Crane said. You should get back to your rounds. It's been a long night. I left the room, but I couldn't shake what I'd seen. The scars, the recording, the look in the patient's eyes. I went back to the ICU and tried to focus on my other patients, but my mind kept returning to room 12. The next night, I went back. The room was empty. The bed was made. The equipment was gone, according to the chart. No patient had been in room 12 for over a year. When I asked the other nurses, they looked at me like I was crazy. Room 12. One of them said, that room's been sealed off. Hasn't been used since the renovation. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. And I knew that somewhere in this hospital, that patient was still being held, still being experimented on, still hoping that someone would believe him. I started investigating quietly. Carefully, I looked for patterns in the patient records. Disappearances that couldn't be explained, procedures that didn't match the diagnosis. What I found terrified me. Over the past 5 years, dozens of patients had vanished from the hospital, transferred to other facilities, according to the records. But when I called those facilities, they had no record of receiving them, and there were other things unexplained. Deaths, patients who had been recovering well, suddenly taking turns for the worse. Organ donations that didn't match the paperwork. I tried to report what I'd found. Went to the administration, to the ethics committee, to the state health department, but every report I filed disappeared. Every meeting I requested was canceled. Every person I tried to contact suddenly became unavailable. That's when I realized the patient had been right. They were everywhere. The conspiracy wasn't limited to a few rogue doctors. It went all the way to the top 3. Weeks have passed since that night. 3 weeks of being watched, of being followed, of having my every move monitored. I know they're on to me. I know they're planning something last night. I found a syringe in my locker filled with a clear liquid that I didn't recognize. A note was attached. For your own good. I threw it away, but I know they'll try again. They'll find a way to get their drugs into my system, to make me compliant, to make me forget. Why I'm telling you this now, while I still can, while I still remember, the patient in bed 12 is still out there, still being tortured, still hoping that someone will save him, and there are others. Dozens of them hidden in the basement, in unused rooms, in places where the regular staff never goes. If something happens to me, if I disappear or suddenly stop working, if I have an accident or a breakdown, remember this story. Remember what I told you, because in hospitals like this one, the real horror isn't disease or death, the people who wear white coats and smile while they destroy lives. It's the institutions that hide behind healing while they practice harm. And it's the silence, a terrible, crushing silence of people who know the truth but are too afraid to speak. Let them silence you. Don't let them make you forget. Patient in bed 12 is counting on you. They all are. My name is Marcus, and I need to tell you about the mirror. I've been working security at St. Mary's Hospital for 8 years now. 8 years of walking empty corridors, checking locked doors, making sure the night shift nurses feel safe. It's a good job. Quiet most of the time, or it was, until they renovated the psychiatric wing room 237, had been sealed off for decades. Nobody talked about why, but the older staff would go quiet whenever someone mentioned it. All I knew was that it had been a patient room once, back in the 70s, and something had happened there, something bad enough that they'd rather leave it empty than risk using it again. But budget cuts change everything. The hospital needed more beds, more revenue. So last spring, they decided to renovate the entire 7th floor room 237 was going to be a standard patient room again. Complete with modern equipment and fresh paint. I was there. The night they broke the seal, the construction crew had left around 6 p.m., and I was doing my usual rounds when I noticed the door was ajar. That shouldn't have been possible. The room had been locked with 3 different deadbolts, and I had the only keys, but there it was, cracked open just enough for a sliver of light to escape into the hallway. I should have called maintenance, should have written it up as a security issue. Instead, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The renovation was almost complete. Fresh white walls, new flooring, a hospital bed already installed and waiting. But what caught my attention was the mirror. It was mounted on the wall, opposite the bed, exactly where you'd expect a bathroom mirror to be. Except this wasn't a bathroom. This was the main room. And the mirror was huge, floor to ceiling, with an ornate gold frame that looked completely out of place in a modern hospital room. Been in that room before. Back when they first started the renovation, there hadn't been any mirror, than just bare walls and construction equipment. Someone must have installed it that day, though I couldn't imagine why anyone would choose something so elaborate for a patient room. I walked closer, studying my reflection. The mirror was old. I could tell that much. The glass had that slightly warped quality that antique mirrors have, making everything look just a little off. My face appeared longer than it should, my eyes darker. Even my uniform looked different, more formal somehow. That's when I noticed the writing. It was etched into the glass itself, so faint I had to angle my head to see it. Numbers and letters scattered across the surface like someone had been keeping score, but score of what? I leaned closer, trying to make sense of the markings. Some of them looked like dates. 1973, 1974, 1975. Others were initials JM, SKRT, and scattered between them, single words, gone, free, home. Finally, I reached out to touch the glass, and that's when I saw Hirsch. He was standing behind me in the reflection. But when I spun around, the room was empty. I turned back to the mirror, and there she was again, a woman in her 30s, wearing a white hospital gown. Her hair was long and dark, hanging around her face like curtains, but it was her eyes that made my blood freeze. They were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like someone had filled them with ink. She was mouthing something, her lips moving silently. I leaned closer to the mirror, trying to read her lips. "Help me," she was saying, over and over. "Help me, help me, help me." I stumbled backward, my hand instinctively going to my radio. But what was I going to say? That I'd seen a ghost in a mirror, that a dead woman was asking for help, they'd think. I'd finally cracked under the pressure of too many night shifts. When I looked back at the mirror, she was gone, just my own reflection staring back, pale and shaken. But the writing was still there, clearer now, and there was something new, fresh scratches in the glass, spelling out a single word. Soon I left the room and locked it behind me, triple-checked the locks, made sure the deadbolts were secure. Then I finished my rounds and tried to forget what I'd seen. But forgetting isn't that easy when you work nights. The next evening, I found myself drawn back to room 237. I told myself I was just being thorough, just making sure the renovation was proceeding normally. But deep down, I knew I was lying. I wanted to see her again, needed to understand what she wanted. The mirror was different this time. The frame was tarnished, like it had aged decades in a single day, and the glass itself looked cloudy, as if someone had breathed on it repeatedly. The writing was more extensive too, more dates, more initials, more single words scattered across the surface. But it was what I saw behind my reflection that made my knees go weak. There wasn't just one figure now. There were dozens, men and women of all ages, all wearing hospital gowns, all with those same black, ink-filled eyes. They were crowded together behind me, pressing against some invisible barrier. Their mouths were moving, all of them speaking at once, but I couldn't hear any sound. The woman from the night before was in front, closest to the glass. She pressed her palm against the mirror's surface, and I watched in horror as her handprint appeared on my side of the glass. Not a reflection of a handprint, but an actual print, as if she'd reached through from wherever. She was and touched the mirror from my side. I reached out without thinking, placing my hand over hers. The cold hit me like a physical blow, not just the chill of glass, but something deeper, something that went straight through my palm and up my arm, settling in my chest like a block of ice. And suddenly, I could hear them not with my ears, but inside my head, dozens of voices, all talking at once, all desperate to be heard. They were patients. I realized former patients who had been in this room, who had died in this room, and they were trapped. The woman in front spoke the loudest. Her name was Rebecca, and she'd been admitted in 1973 for severe depression. She'd been given experimental treatments, medications that the doctors said would help her. Instead, they'd made her worse, much worse. She'd started seeing things, hearing voices, talking to people who weren't there. The doctors had said it was progress, that she was finally expressing her inner turmoil. They'd encouraged her to interact with her hallucinations, to give them names and personalities. They'd even installed the mirror so she could practice social interactions with her own reflection. But the hallucinations weren't hallucinations. They were the spirits of previous patients. And the mirror was a doorway. Every patient who had died in room 237 had become trapped behind the glass, waiting for someone to notice them, waiting for someone to help them cross over. Rebecca had figured it out near the end. She tried to destroy the mirror, to break the connection, but the staff had sedated her, restrained her. They'd said she was having a psychotic episode, and when she died 3 days later, she joined the others behind the glass. Been waiting ever since, waiting for someone who could see them, who could hear them, someone who could help them find their way to whatever comes next. I tried to pull my hand away, but Rebecca's grip was too strong. The cold was spreading through my body now, and I could feel my own life force being drawn toward the mirror. She wasn't trying to hurt me. I realized she was trying to show me something. The room around me began to change. The modern renovation faded away, replaced by the hospital room, as it had been in the 70s. Outdated equipment, different furniture, walls painted a sickly green instead of white, and in the bed, lying perfectly still, was Rebecca herself. But she wasn't alone. There were others in the room, translucent figures standing around the bed, former patients, all of them, all waiting to welcome her to their side of the mirror. And sitting in a chair beside the bed was a Dr. Dr. Edmund Marsh, according to the nameplate on his coat. He was watching Rebecca die with cold, clinical interest, making notes on a clipboard, occasionally glancing at the mirror with satisfaction. He knew what the mirror was. I realized he'd put it there deliberately. He'd been collecting patients, trapping their souls for some twisted experiment. The vision faded, and I was back in the present. Rebecca was still holding my hand through the glass, but her grip was weaker. Now she'd shown me what I needed to see. Now it was up to me to decide what to do about Heidi. Spent the rest of the night researching Dr. Marsh. The hospital records were incomplete, but I found enough to piece together the story. He'd been conducting unauthorized experiments on psychiatric patients in the 70s, using them to test theories about consciousness and death. The hospital had covered it up when he'd finally gone too far. When too many patients had died under mysterious circumstances. Dr. Marsh had resigned in disgrace and disappeared. The room had been sealed, and everyone had tried to forget, but the patients were still there, still trapped, still waiting. I went back to room 237 the next night, and the night after that. Each time, the crowd behind the mirror grew larger. Word was spreading. Somehow, other trapped souls from other parts of the hospital were finding their way to the mirror. They pressed against the glass desperately, begging me to help them. I tried everything I could think of. I brought a priest, but he couldn't see them. I tried breaking the mirror, but the glass was impossibly strong. I even tried talking to the hospital administration, but they just looked at me like I'd lost my mind. It was Rebecca who finally showed me the solution. She pointed to something behind me, and when I turned, I saw it, a loose floorboard near the corner of the room. Hidden underneath was Dr. Marsh's journal, page after page of meticulous notes about his experiments, about the mirror, about the patients he'd trapped. The last entry was dated just before his resignation. He'd realized that the mirror was becoming too powerful, that the trapped souls were finding ways to influence the living world. He tried to contain them, to strengthen the barrier, but they were too strong, too angry. Had written down a way to reverse the process, a ritual that would free the trapped souls and destroy the mirror's power, but he'd never had the chance to perform it. He'd been discovered before he could finish his work. The ritual was complex, requiring specific words spoken at a specific time. It had to be performed at 3:17 a.m., the exact moment when the barrier between worlds was thinnest, and it had to be done by someone who could see the trapped souls, someone they trusted. I performed the ritual on a Thursday night in November. I stood before the mirror at 3:16 a.m., Dr. Marsh's journal in my hands. A crowd behind the glass was larger than ever, hundreds of faces pressed against the surface, all watching me with desperate hope. Rebecca was still in front, her black eyes fixed on mine. At exactly 3:17, I began to read. The words were in Latin, mostly ancient phrases that felt heavy on my tongue. As I spoke, the mirror began to glow, not with light, but with something else, something that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The faces behind the glass began to smile, one by one. They stepped backward, fading into a bright light that seemed to come from nowhere. They were finally free. Finally able to move on to whatever waited beyond. Rebecca was the last to go. She pressed her palm against the glass one final time, and I pressed mine against hers. The cold was gone now, replaced by warmth, by gratitude, by peace. "Thank you," she mouthed, and then she too stepped into the light and disappeared. The mirror shattered not dramatically, not with a crash. It simply fell apart, piece by piece, until nothing remained but empty space and a pile of glass on the floor. The ornate frame crumbled to dust, and Dr. Marsh's journal burst into flames in my hands room. 237 has been a normal patient room ever since the renovation was completed, and patients stay there without incident. But sometimes, late at night, I catch glimpses of movement in the windows, reflections of people who aren't there. Think they're free now. I hope they are. But I've learned something about hospitals that I wish I hadn't. We're not just places of healing. We're places where the boundary between life and death grows thin, where the desperate and the dying sometimes refuse to let go, and sometimes we're the ones who have to help them find their way home, even when home is somewhere we can't follow, even when helping them means walking deeper into the darkness ourselves. I still work security at St. Mary's, still walk those empty corridors at night. But now I carry Dr. Marsh's research in my head, and I know what to look for, because room 237 wasn't the only place he conducted his experiments. There are other mirrors, other rooms, other souls waiting for someone brave enough to see them, and I'm the only one who knows how to set them free. My name is Sarah, and I need to tell you about the stethoscope. It was a Tuesday night in October. 3 months ago, I was working the cardiac unit, 3rd floor. When Mrs. Henderson in room 314 passed away, it happens. You know, more often than people realize, but there was something different about Mrs. Henderson's death, something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. She'd been with us for 2 weeks, recovering from heart surgery, a sweet woman. In her 70s, always asking about my day, always worried that she was being too much trouble. She wasn't patients like her make the job worth it, or so I thought the night she died. I was doing my rounds around midnight. The floor was quiet except for the usual sounds of monitors and ventilators. I entered her room to check her vitals, and that's when I saw it. Her stethoscope was lying on the bedside table. But here's the thing. Mrs. Henderson didn't have a stethoscope. Patients don't carry their own medical equipment. It was beautiful. I'll give it that antique looking, with a deep red chest piece that seemed to gleam even in the dim light. The tubing was black, almost too black, like it absorbed light rather than reflected it, and there was an inscription on the chest piece. Though I couldn't make out the words in the darkness, I should have called someone, should have asked questions instead. I picked it up. The metal was warm against my palm, which was strange, because the room was cold. Hospital rooms are always cold. But this stethoscope felt like it had been sitting in sunlight, like it had its own internal heat source. I turned it over in my hands, studying the craftsmanship. It was clearly old, probably from the 50s or 60s, with that heavy, substantial feel that modern equipment lacks. Mrs. Henderson stirred then, and I looked up to see her eyes open. She was looking right at me, directly at the stethoscope in my hands. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I leaned closer, thinking she was trying to tell me something about her breathing. About pain. Mine, she whispered. Just that one word, so soft I almost missed it. Mine. And then she was gone. Just like that. No alarms. No dramatic gasping for breath. One moment she was there. The next she wasn't. The monitors didn't even register the change for several seconds. By the time the flatline alarm started wailing, I was already staring at an empty shell, holding a stethoscope that shouldn't have existed. I called the code blue. Went through all the motions. Dr. Martinez arrived, followed by the rest of the team, We worked on her for 20 minutes. But we all knew it was over time of death. 12:47 a.m. during the chaos. I slipped the stethoscope into my pocket. I don't know why it felt important somehow. Like Mrs. Henderson had left it for me specifically. Like it was meant to be mine now. Rest of the shift passed in a blur. I finished my rounds, completed my paperwork, said goodbye to the day shift nurses. But all I could think about was the weight of that stethoscope in my pocket. The way it seemed to pulse against my leg, like a second heartbeat. I should have left it at the hospital. Should have turned it in too. Lost and found. Instead, I took it home. My apartment felt different that morning, smaller somehow. Like the walls were closer together than they'd been. When I left for work, I set the stethoscope on my kitchen counter and stared at it. On my coffee brewed, in the morning light, I could finally read the inscription. Dr. Eleanor Thorne, 1962. I'd never heard of Dr. Thorne, but something about the name sent a chill down my spine. I spent the day researching, diving deep into hospital records and medical journals. What I found made my blood run cold. Eleanor Thorne had worked at our hospital from 1960 to 1963. She'd been a cardiologist, brilliant by all accounts, but there were rumors, whispers about her methods, about the way her patients seemed to recover too quickly, about the strange incidents that followed her wherever she went. The hospital records were vague, but newspaper archives told a different story. 3 patients had died under mysterious circumstances, while under Dr. Thorne's care. All of them had been recovering well. All of them had been expected to make full recoveries. Instead, they died. In their sleep, no apparent cause. No warning signs. The investigation had been inconclusive. Dr. Thorne had resigned shortly after, claiming the stress was too much. She'd moved away. And the trail went cold. But here's the thing that made my hands tremble as I read. Here's the detail that changed everything. Each of the 3 patients had been found with their own stethoscope, antique stethoscopes with red chest pieces. Stethoscopes that hospital staff swore they'd never seen before. I didn't sleep that day. Couldn't even lie down every time I closed my eyes. I heard Mrs. Henderson's voice, mine, and underneath it, fainter but growing stronger, other voices, 3 voices, all whispering the same word. That evening, I tried to return the stethoscope to the hospital. I drove there with it in a bag on my passenger seat, planning to leave it at the nurse's station with a note. But when I reached for the bag, my hand wouldn't move. It was like my muscles had forgotten how to respond. I sat in the parking lot for an hour, fighting against something I couldn't name, until finally I gave up and drove home. Stethoscope was waiting for me on the kitchen counter. I was certain I'd taken it with me. But there it was, exactly where I'd left it. The inscription seemed darker now, more prominent, and the red chest piece was definitely warmer than it should have been. I tried calling in sick the next night, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I heard myself saying I'd be there early, that I wanted to pick up an extra shift. My supervisor was pleased. Good nurses are hard to find. She said little did she know I arrived at the hospital an hour before my shift started. The stethoscope was in my pocket again, though I didn't remember putting it there. It felt heavier now, like it was made of lead instead of metal. And it was warm, so warm that I could feel it through the fabric of my scrubs. My first patient was Mr. Reeves in room 308, routine post-op care. Nothing complicated, but when I entered his room, I felt the stethoscope pulse against my leg. Not a gentle warmth this time, but something urgent, demanding. I found myself pulling it out, placing the earpieces in my ears without thinking. The chest piece felt natural in my hand, like it had been made for me. I pressed it against Mr. Reeves' chest, and what I heard made my knees go weak. It wasn't his heartbeat. It was music, faint but unmistakable, like a radio playing in another room. A waltz, slow and melancholy, with an underlying rhythm that matched the pattern of his breathing. And underneath the music, Voices. The same 3 voices I'd been hearing, plus a 4th Mrs. Henderson they were. Calling to him, whispering his name, telling him how peaceful it was, how much better he'd feel if he just let go. I yanked the stethoscope away, gasping, but the voices continued not in my ears now, but in the room itself. Mr. Reeves was stirring, his eyes opening, looking around with confusion. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice weak. "The music, it's beautiful. I had to get out of there." I mumbled something about checking on other patients and fled the room, but I could hear the music following me down the hall, getting louder with each step. Other patients were waking up, asking about the waltz, asking if there was a radio playing somewhere by the end of my shift. 3 patients had asked about the music. 3 patients who hadn't been able to hear anything. Unusual the night before, and the stethoscope in my pocket was burning now. So hot I thought it might leave a mark. I tried to throw it away when I got home, tried to bury it in my trash, to hide it in my closet, to lock it in my car. But every time I turned around, there it was, on my nightstand, on my kitchen counter, hanging from my bathroom mirror, always warm, always waiting. It's been 3 months now. 3 months of carrying Dr. Thorne's stethoscope, of hearing voices that don't belong to the living, of watching patients slip away with that same peaceful expression Mrs. Henderson had worn. The hospital. Administration thinks I'm having a remarkably successful run. My patient satisfaction scores are through the roof. People love the way I make them feel comfortable, the way I help them accept their situation. But I know the truth. I'm not helping them heal. I'm helping them cross over. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake during the day, is that I'm starting to enjoy it, starting to crave that moment when the stethoscope grows warm and the music begins to play. Last week, I heard my own name whispered in the melody, just once, so faint. I almost missed it, but it was there. Dr. Thorne is calling to me now, adding my voice to her collection, and I think I'm ready to answer. The stethoscope is warm against my chest as I tell you this. I can feel my heart beating through it, can hear the familiar waltz beginning to play. Soon, very soon, there will be 4 voices calling to the patients, 4 voices helping them find their way to whatever comes next. I just hope, when my time comes, someone will be kind enough to carry me with them, to keep me warm in their pocket, to let me sing to the frightened and the dying. It's not such a terrible way to spend eternity, really. It's not terrible at all. If you're still listening, maybe you've worked in a hospital too. Maybe you've walked those sterile corridors when the world sleeps. Maybe you've seen things that don't make it into the reports. If these stories have stirred something in you, if they've awakened memories you thought you'd buried, if they've made you question what really happens in the places where healing and harm walk hand in hand, then you understand why we had to share them. Here on Whisper and Wonders, we believe that the most terrifying stories are the ones that could be true, the ones that make you look twice at the people you trust, the ones that make you question the institutions you depend on. If you've made it this far, if you've listened to our confessions and felt that familiar chill, then maybe you have a story too. Maybe you've seen something that shouldn't exist. Maybe you've heard whispers in the dark that weren't meant for living ears. Share your story with us. Comment below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is in your world. Tell us if you've ever felt that presence watching you from the shadows, because your story matters, your experience is real, and together we can shine light into the darkest corners of the places we thought were safe. Subscribe to Whisper and Wonders. Help us reach 10,000 souls who aren't afraid to face the truth, who aren't afraid to listen when the dead have something to say. We've only just begun, and your story might be next day. Curious, stay afraid, and remembering, the places where life and death meet, nothing is ever as it seems.
Thanks for watching.